Welcome and welcome to Onkwarihwa'shon television, a program that talks about our laws, how they're developed and how they're passed, and the processes that go along with that, how they're amended, etc. This is our second program in the series, and joining us once again is the coordinator for the Legislative Coordinating Commission, Linda Delormier. And joining us after a bit of a hiatus, and we'd like to welcome back Ron Skye, the Justice Coordinator, or the Justice...
Director of Justice Services.
Director of Justice Services here in Kahnawake. It's an important position, so let's get the terminology right here. The Justice Act is the first going through the community decision-making process, and the mandate was given over a year ago to move it forward so that we can get back into the hearings and get this passed. Today on the program, we're going to talk about the process and how people can get involved, because even though we had quite a few people who were involved, I would imagine a lot of people are nervous about, am I going to do the right thing? Am I turning left when I go in the door and things like that? So we're going to make it comfortable for people, and we'd like to welcome you both to the program. All right, we'll start off with you, Ron, and it's been, I guess, a challenging few years to try and get a Justice Act that is for Kahnawake, by Kahnawake, and the process to get there has been complicated, and maybe you can just tell us your experience in this process from the start of the concept of getting this together and to where we're at now.
Okay. Well, I guess maybe a little historical context is maybe required, and if you look at how this all came about, we know that generally the community had some concerns or dissatisfaction in how historically laws were made within the community. So the elected council, was challenged with devising or developing a new process that would be more inclusive for the community, individual stakeholders, and that would change the process to be more of in line with our traditional, if you want, form of thinking or decision making. So that task was given to the OCC at one time, and there was participation involved from the traditional working group, and they developed a concept. That concept was further defined within the OCC, and then the interim legislative coordinating committee was struck and further refined. The process was further refined and finally approved by council for us to move forward. So within that process now, it has changed from the initial concept, and we did some consultation, meaning the ILCC did some consultation with the community. We got some great feedback, and there was some really good participation, and on the onset where the community members who had participated said, we like this, but you know what, you need to change this, or we like this and we like this to be modified, even shortening some of the process, because it is lengthy from the original concept, and so it evolved. And fortunately for us, and I look at it in a positive light, is that we have the ability to refine it as we go along. Some people may say that it's not a good thing. They want to see it written in black and white that this is what's going to be. But because we're evolving and we're moving towards that step of being more inclusive in how we make decisions, that we need the ability to be able to evolve and change the process to suit the needs. So it's a good thing. I look at it as a positive thing.
Yeah, one of the things, of course, that has changed over the last little while is it went from the interim Legislative Coordinating Committee to the Legislative Coordinating Commission, which is what it is now. So it's kind of more formal there. And maybe you can continue along with some of the experiences on the justice.
So I guess justice was the first one that was proposed first, because we are looking at changing how we justice is dispensed, if you would, in our community, to make it more reflective of the nature, if you would, of not just Kahnawake, but Aboriginal society in general. We feel, and this is from the Justice Commission's perspective also, there's been a multitude of reports that have been authorized or commissioned by different government agencies that state that Aboriginal justice must be given back to the Aboriginal communities, changes within federal or provincial legislation that must be done to accommodate Aboriginal needs. And that's all fine and dandy. But we also feel that we've been so overly studied that it's time that we need to take control over what we feel is appropriate or deemed necessary in our community. So hence, the need to develop our own Justice Act system, however we choose to define it at the end. So the involvement of the Justice Commission within this whole process has been, I guess, key to a certain degree, in that we're the first piece of legislation that's moved forward. So are we the guinea pigs? Yes. Do we enjoy the challenge? Definitely.
Well, it's logical that justice, because if we're going to be changing our laws and yet we don't have a Justice Act, I guess a lot of this becomes moot.
That's right. I mean, there are certain institutions, if you want to call them at this point, that are key and maybe central to any type of society, and justice is one of them. They're one of your pillars, of how you regulate, and it might not be a good word using regulate, but how society itself monitors, its values, if you want, and its morals to a certain degree. And there has to be controls in there, if you want, or checks and balances in relation to what would be appropriate behavior, or acceptable behavior within any type of society. And justice, if you want to call it justice, is one of those tools, and it is the pillar, of how people interact and what is acceptable. So, moving that forward, we had the opportunity to engage the whole process first, and we started out first doing some research that we had done from the 80s and 90s with consultations with the communities and with the community, and using that as our basis to kickstart our whole orientation. And that's part of the process within this, what we're doing right now, is that we need to inform and educate the community on where we were and where we are and what we need. It's not to tell them what we're going to do. It's just to inform them, this is what we have. This is where we came from in relation to justice, using the whole Indian Age and Indian Act type thing, up to how our own JPs came into force, the policing services, the court itself, and then looking down the road as to what our potential needs, what we see, not what the community sees, but we see from a justice perspective, what the needs are going to be. And let the community hash it out. Do they agree or not agree? So that whole orientation period, if you want, took about a good 18 months. And we held different types of forums at different locations. And just on a side note, it seemed like every time we had one of the justice information sessions during the winter, there was a snowstorm, or it was 42 below zero, but people still came out, and it was very encouraging, for us, for people to really take the time and to want to be informed about what was going on. So it lent us a real positive atmosphere, to keep moving forward.
For that process, how long did that take, roughly?
It was about 18 months. About 18 months we did the initial orientation, if you want, information gathering, orientation, and education or discussion with the community, just on where we're at, what happened, how did we get here?
And in the meantime, of course, Linda, there was other work going on, such as getting the community up to speed with especially the mock sessions, something we talked about in the past, which gave us an indication of, can this actually work, which was a challenge, and maybe just some thoughts on that.
Well, while Ron was working on educating the community on the history of justice in Kahnawake and what we were, what we are now, and what we need, we were busy trying to educate the community on what the process is going to be, how, when the Justice Act comes, we're going to actually decide and discuss and plan and develop this new piece of legislation. So we did have those mock sessions where we actually practiced the format in which we would be building consensus in order to determine whether or not the Justice Commission would get a mandate to develop the law.
Yeah, and they were positive. I mean, I participated in all of them myself, and we just tried to get as much of a general overview of community members and things like that, and all kinds of people were there, and they gave their comments, good, bad, and indifferent, but for the most part they were good. And I think that's what's kind of kept everything going so far, is that there hasn't been anything really bad. that has been said. That's like just, I hate it, that's it, no.
Yeah. Well, any negative comments that we did receive are still good because they help to refine the process. And when we started this process, we had said this is a transitional, thing, that this is going to be refined. This is what we're going to be doing to move the community forward, to educate the community on how it is we want to make decisions in the future and what the community told us in 1979 and how are we going to do that. And it really is up to the community to guide us and to refine it as we move along. It does make for some confusing times sometimes, but I think it's really a good mix in everything that we're doing.
Well, one of the things that came out of it is that, the consultation was done, the mock sessions were done, community was given information on how to get out there and participate. We'll get into a little more detail on that. But Ron, when it actually came time to have the first hearing, it was pretty exciting for the people. Maybe it didn't seem so for the participants, but for the people who were involved in this, it was groundbreaking. It was something that we haven't seen for forever in Kahnawake. And maybe you can walk us through that experience of saying today is the first hearing of our proposed Justice Act.
Well, I have a passion for this type of thing. I think most people know that. I really enjoy what I do. And when we went into the first hearings, and I'm wearing kind of three hats at the same time because I am the Director of Justice Services. Also on the LCC, appointed there at this point. So when we look at the consultation that was done with the community on the mock sessions and how the process would work forward, the ones of us who were involved had a real, if you want to call it, an intimate understanding of what the community had said and how they wanted the process to move forward. So from the justice perspective, we had a better knowledge, I guess, or understanding of what needed to be done. So as we move forward to actually having the consultations with the community on receiving a mandate, okay? And I really consider this historic in nature because we're moving from the concept, if you would, and the restrictions and the imposition of the Indian Act. We said you can make laws in relation to this under 81, and this is the process that's going to be used. And really acknowledging what the community has said, saying we don't want the Indian Act to apply this, well then fine. Now we're actually taking that step. We're taking not just words now, not just the rhetoric that's going to say, this is what we want. For so long we've been asking, now we're actually doing. We're implementing. So to me that was, it's historic. Mm-hmm. And maybe some people don't see it that way, but I do. I really do. Now we're actually taking control of what we actually deem appropriate as far as laws, regulations, standards, moral activity within our community. And that's what we want. That's what we say we want. Well, then let's do it. And it's great.
And the mandate's been given, and in the meantime, the working group has been working on drafting and things like that. Let's talk a bit about the process and people's involvement. Now, the very first hearing was, I think, fairly well attended, but even if we had 500 people in there, and that's maybe a wild number, but even if we had 1,000 people, that would mean that there's still about 6,000 or 7,000 people who didn't go. So for those who didn't go, what is the expectation when people go in and it's a big mystery? Maybe they've never participated in anything. What should people expect when they go to a hearing in the type 1 such as the Justice Act?
As soon as they walk in, they'll be welcomed by one of the recorders or one of the facilitators, and they'll be led to one of 3 groups. And we're building consensus, so we're using the 3-group system, and they'll be given instructions on what the content is based on the communication strategy and all of the consultation that occurred before. Using justice as the example, all of the consultation that they did, the surveys, the mock sessions, the information sessions, all of the reports that they had, and all of the education that went on before. This is where all of that culminates. So when you go in, you're assigned a group, you sit with your group. Each group has a facilitator who's on the LCC, and we're responsible for the process, to facilitate the process. We have someone from Justice, the Justice Commission, who is responsible for the content of the law. We have one of the council chiefs who sits on the Chiefs Oversight Committee, and their job is to make sure that I'm doing my job. And then we have a community representative who is appointed by the three groups to represent the community when we go for drafting the legislation. And then we have their recorder who records all of the information and all of the discussion that happens at the table, and it's available on a projected screen while they're doing it. It's actually being projected while it's being worked on. So as each group discusses the item that they're talking about that evening, the other two groups are doing the same thing, and we go through the process for building consensus.
How do we make sure that everybody has a chance to speak?
Well, those are the principles that we determine at the beginning of the session. We have, I guess, rules of engagement or guideline, and we have a preamble that was actually developed at one of the mock sessions by the community, and it's based on our historic principles and values of the Great Law of Peace and all of that stuff, to make sure that everything we do is done with respect, that everybody has the opportunity to have a voice and to have a safe place to have a voice. And I can't stress that enough. This is for everybody in the community, and it's an opportunity for everybody, no matter what group, faction, special interest group, religion, height, size, weight, whatever you are, you have the right to voice your opinion in a safe place. And that's really what I want to provide to the community. And once you're there, you follow the rules and the guidelines. You're self-regulating within that group. You know, the entire group regulates what the group does and what the group says, and they make sure that everybody stays in check. And then once they have a position, they pass it over to the next group, and they debate it, and they take the pros, the cons, and they add to it, and so on and so forth until they come to consensus. And then it goes to the third group, who's the mediator, or who provides what's missing, and approves or doesn't approve. So it's a longer process. But I think it's plan twice, measure, or measure twice, cut once.
Yeah.
That's what it is. I guess that's the concept we'll go with.
But interesting enough now, as we went through some of the sessions, because Justice was the first one, and if we look at part of the rationale for wanting, or the community asking, that a different format be used to make laws, I mean, part of it was the old rabble-rousing, get up at a council meeting and take the floor for 30 minutes and say, and whether we want to acknowledge it or not, intimidation can always be a factor, okay? Some people are shy to speak in large groups or to publicly state their views. They're kind of the silent, and I believe the silent majority, even though they may have a position, they don't like to express it, and even less so in a larger forum. So using these smaller groups, if you would, or the three groups, affords the individual the opportunity to express their opinion. Mm-hmm. And some of the people that came out, within the community, you don't see them at the normal band meetings, if you would. And they were there expressing their opinion. Again, why? Because, a different process. Maybe they did feel that sense of actually being able to be heard. No intimidation factor, And what Linda said, it's true, you could see it, that the group, each individual group became self-regulating, which is what we're about. If someone stepped out of line, you correct it. So it's interesting to see that type of dynamic within the group, even though it wasn't highlighted, it was actually taking place. And I don't think the people that were there really realized what they were doing. They were actually doing what we always did. So it was good.
Now, there were some people who took part from the very first hearing all the way through until the mandate was passed. But there's other people who would be kind of nervous. I've never gone to one. Am I going to have to, how much catching up will I have to do? The thing is, with the hearings is, it was very welcoming, and you could kind of come in during. And I guess that's part of the thing that we have to try and remind people, is that if you miss the first meeting, if you miss the second and third meeting, you still have the opportunity to go to the fourth or the fifth, or maybe just for the ending, and then see what happened.
As an individual community member, and depending on the type of legislation that's being proposed, it obviously is given to the community beforehand. So depending on the legislation, so supposing you as a community member read through this legislation and the law and you say, I agree with all these sections from 1 to 25. However, section 26, I really have a concern about. Do I have to go through 1 to 25, number one, because I agree with it? Maybe not, you don't have to. But when section 26 comes up and then maybe it's time for you to participate, but it doesn't mean you have to start at the beginning and be there for as long as it takes. No, but remind you now, once a decision or a consensus has been reached by the groups, we don't go back. So it's like speak now or forever hold your peace. That's kind of the principle, that's used. We don't want to rehash something that's already been done and already agreed to by consensus of the groups. So the participation of individuals, it's not restricted to certain timelines or while the session has begun or from the beginning or to the end. It's any time you feel comfortable.
And I guess it's also very important to remind people that whenever there's a meeting, it's very well publicized and what's on the agenda. So it shouldn't be one of those things where people should feel like things are being snuck through, because that's not certainly not the intention at all.
Definitely not. The whole process is meant to be open and transparent. That's a key.
And it's able to be refined. So if someone doesn't attend the first few sessions and they want their feedback or they want to have their opinion heard, they can always come to our office, and we have everything for every piece of legislation. We have binders and binders of everything that's happened with regard to the process, with regard to the content, the drafting, everything. So if somebody wants to familiarize themselves with what's happened, they just have to come to our office and review all of the documentation. We are working at getting it online, but that's still a few months away. They don't have to, like you said, be present for all of the sessions. They can come to any of them, and they can just feel safe at being at any of them.
Yeah, and most of them too end up going back to the same group, because you want to be in the same group, because there is continuity there. You remember that, I was in so-and-so's group, and so you kind of go back there. Because in the end, the groups take a life of their own, and each group takes ownership and self-polices or self-regulates, as you said, which was very interesting. So now that we look at that and we see that Justice went through something that maybe was a little less controversial, because in the legwork that was done beforehand, there was like a 90% approval rating, or 95% in some, where people were asked, do you want a justice system? So people wanted it, but even though everybody wanted it, at the same time, it still took a long time, because, we want it, but what does that mean? So there are no done deals, I guess, is really when you look at it in any law.
And it was refined as a result of the hearings too. We changed the fact that the community representative couldn't work for the MCK or any of its offices, because the community thought, well, it's an MCK process and you're going to have community members from the MCK. We are community members, but that was something that changed. There were things that changed along the way, and that's what's really good about this process. As we move from representative to participatory in our system, whatever it's going to be, that these changes can keep occurring.
Yeah, and there are people who are just going to say it's not going to work, or they don't want it to work, or for whatever reason, and that's their right to, the right of expression is always there.
Definitely. If people have an opposition, or individuals have an opposition to the process or what we're doing, please voice it, But I'd also like to put the challenge out there, is that if you have an opposition, please come with 2 solutions so everybody else can discuss it. We all can complain, and that's fine. But if you're going to complain, come with a solution also.
Well, there you have it. That's it in a nutshell. When you think of it, is that people have been saying for years, we want to be involved in the government. Well, here's everyone's chance, and it's a growing process, and there's a lot more to do. Linda, unfortunately, due to I guess career considerations at this point, you'll be leaving the file, which is we're certainly appreciative of all the work that you've done, and we're going to be sorry to see you go. So at this point, you'll be moving on to your other jobs that you have to do, and but just maybe some thoughts on personally what it's meant for you to be involved in such a groundbreaking file.
Well, there's a lot of contradicting feelings here, from one side, and the obvious, traditional versus council system and all of these things. And I guess one of the biggest challenges I had was to convince people that these are where all the opposing forces are, and this is as far as we could get them together. Now it's up to all of us to continue to move it forward into the direction that we want. And that's what the past 6 years has really been about. And I think any system can work. We just have to, I don't want to sound cliche, but we just have to work together and trust each other. And it's been a real exercise in patience and a lot of other things. But I've really enjoyed it, and I'm not moving my office. I'm just moving files. So I'll be around, and I'm sure I'll be seeing you guys quite often.
The challenge that we all had, and maybe you more so because we were involved from the beginning, from 2001 on, is that this to instill the notion and the confidence and the belief that this is a community process. It's not a MCK process. It's a community process, and that's the challenge.
Yeah.
Because you will have that kind of divisions that'll say it's because you're working for MCK. It's not. This is for the community. This is what they said.
And that's going to take a long time to change because, there was a recent meeting where you had 6 or 7 chiefs, and as soon as they speak, well, you're a council chief, and we have to remember that there's a moving back, especially when it comes time to make the decisions themselves. Council does not make the final decision. The only thing that it does at the end is to sign off on the law, because somebody technically has to do that at the end of the day, but that only happens once it's gone through the entire process. And again, just to finish off in terms of process, right now and for the last little while, the Justice Commission has been in hearings, not hearings, but the drafting is taking place. And that's a lot of work. There's a lot of detail work that's been going on. That will then go back to the community, and then we go back once again to hearings and going to the next part.
Yeah.
Coming soon.
Yeah,
To a theater near you.
Yeah.
Check your
Exactly.
local listings.
That's just a clarification though on the approval, if you want, of the process. In a type 1 legislation, it's the community who does the approval. But in type 2, the council, and it could be, I'm saying council at this point, and I'll be more generic in saying the government of the day, because that could change, has the responsibility in a type 2 legislation, which is more regulatory in nature, to ensure that the values and the principles, security and safety of the community are safeguarded. So they have a responsibility to protect, if you want, that silent majority, okay, out there. So the approval of those types of laws, the type 2, is also with council, okay? Even though you get the community input and from the individual stakeholders or private stakeholders, at the end of the day, that approval has to come from the elected body, okay, which has to protect the community at large.
And of course, in type 1, the community makes that decision. And then, like I said, technically at the end of the day, there's signatures that are involved, and that's really it. So just about does it for us. We're all out of time, but it's been interesting. Linda, again, thank you so much for all your help in these past few years. Of course, we'll see you around, but you won't be part of this file anymore as the coordinator. And Ron, great to have you back, and a lot of work to do. And it was great to have you join us for this afternoon or this evening, wherever, whatever time you're watching this. And a reminder that we'll be doing this again on an ongoing basis to learn about how we make our laws, how we pass them, how we amend them, and how you can participate and should participate. So until next time, from all of us here at Onkwarihwa'shon TV, thanks for watching. Yauko Adano Onigi Wahi.